But let me turn to the missile strikes that Iran launched against Israel, 300 of them. It was spectacularly unsuccessful. I mean, it caused barely any damage. Again, you're smirking. You can explain why. But it was a spectacular failure, wasn't it, by Iran? Just a load of showboating and throwing fireworks in the air with actually no result whatsoever, other than they hurt one little girl.
Of course, I'm smirking. It's funny the way in which you always frame things where the other and the non-Westerner is incompetent and incapable, and your fantastic Israeli allies are on top of their game. No, in fact, it was a major defeat for the Israelis and for the Americans. And why? Because the Iranians from the very beginning, well, let me tell you. First of all, the Israeli regime carried out an airstrike on an Iranian embassy. The whole world condemned it. Forget the West, forget the UK and the US. You are marginalized. You supported it because at the UN Security Council, your regime, the American regime and the French regime, they prevented the condemnation of the bombing of the Iranian embassy. So the world rallied behind Iran. And Iran said, we're going to retaliate. But what did Iran do? Iran played it very smart. They played 10 days of mind games with the Israeli regime, and then they declared that they're going to carry out the attack. So the Israelis and the Americans and everyone mobilized everything they had, and the Iranians sent hundreds of dirt cheap drones, a few $1,000s each, to fly, and it took 3 hours for them to get there. And then your Israeli allies spent, according to their own estimates, $1.35 billion to down drones that didn't cost probably $2 million for Iran. The Iranians did not use any of their new technology. It was all old technology. So the Israelis gained nothing, but the Iranians gained a huge amount of information about the capabilities of the Americans and the Israelis. And I must say that that most of the things were done by the Americans, not the Israelis or the British or the French. And then the Iranians sent a series of old missiles that they had in stock for a long time, none of it with the latest technology. And then again, the Americans and the Israelis attacked them with very expensive missile defense systems and use all their capabilities, giving the Iranians huge amounts of information. Again, a couple of $1 million. No one is going to buy those old missiles. And then Iran fired a handful alongside these missiles, a handful of serious missiles that were targeted at two bases, the two most heavily defended military sites in the world, an air base in the south and an intelligence gathering base, I think, in the north. And both of them received direct hits. So the Israelis they showed their hand. They spent a lot of money at a time when these missiles there's a huge shortage of them because of Ukraine. And the Iranians gave no information about their capabilities. Even those missiles
I've got to say, that's one of the more entertaining explanations for such an abject failure that I've heard.
Should I smirk again?
And let me take you back to what Israel said they committed the bombing in Damascus for, was because they discovered that the building was diplomatic in name only and being used as an Iranian military and intelligence base, hence the presence of all these generals, two of whom were killed, along with all the others there. So if it was being used as a military base, and they were training Hezbollah, which is what they believed they were doing, then it was a legitimate target, wasn't it?
Well, of course, since you support the Israeli narrative and you are a friend of the people who are carrying out this Holocaust, this ongoing Holocaust, and you don't care about the people.
I don't support any narrative. I'm just asking you whether if it was being used as a military base, was it a legitimate target if they're training Hezbollah to attack Israel?
You have rather one of the most extreme narratives, and I think you're doing a disservice to truth by
actually, I don't at all. I've been very critical of Israel, but I don't believe. Whenever I interview people who can't find it in themselves to actually say what Hamas did on October the 7th, I always find it slightly incredulous. Then whatever else they say, because we all saw what happened with our own eyes.
People are not intimidated by you. That's the problem. You can intimidate some of your own people, but you can't intimidate us.
I don't want to intimidate anybody. I want to get to the. I want to find out. I'm just fascinated. Okay, let me ask you this.
No,
I mean,
let me
okay,
ask you a
Professor, I'm not
question.
trying to be timid.
That is a diplomatic
No, you don't ask the questions.
Just like the
I ask the
British,
questions.
that is, no, I'm answering your question. That was a diplomatic building. You know quite well that the Israelis had no right to touch it. They committed a crime, and the Iranian retaliation was an act of self-defense. And your own foreign minister humiliated himself on Sky News, which is an outlet that is sympathetic to the regime, when he said, well, if one of our diplomatic buildings were struck, how would the response be? So don't be silly. The Israeli regime, they're always lying, just like the Al-Shifa hospital. They're full of underground tunnels. Where were the tunnels? And then at the beginning, when they struck the Al-Hili hospital and killed hundreds of people, they said, no, it was the resistance, and the Western intelligence agencies said the same thing. And then we saw them hit hospital after hospital after hospital after hospital. So you put your faith in the narrative of these child killers who bomb hospitals and destroy the very basis of humanity, the very basic needs for ordinary people in Gaza. Come on.
And yet here's the irony, Professor. Here's the irony, is that all the attention that was falling actually on Israel's war on Hamas in Gaza, and whether it was a massive overreach and whether too many civilians were being killed, and when we saw the aid workers killed, obviously enraged people as well, it was all heading the way that Iran would have liked, which is that it was general global outrage that was fermenting about what was going on there. Now, the narrative has changed, hasn't it? Because what we saw were countries like Jordan racing to help Israel defend itself against Iran's missiles, the ones that you've tried to dismiss but were actual missiles. And how does that help Iran's narrative that Israel are the bad people in the region when you have major Arab countries like Jordan and Saudi offering airspace and so on? How does that help your cause to try and isolate Israel? All you did was achieve the complete opposite, didn't you?
Absolutely not. First of all, the people of Jordan know that the Israeli regime considers the Palestinians to be Amalek. We're not dumb, Pierce, and they're not dumb. The government of Jordan does not represent the people. You know this, and I know that. But more importantly...
Well, the government of Iran doesn't represent the Iranian people, does it?
It represents the Iranian people more than your government represents the British people. But the Iranians...
Actually, I wouldn't say that at all.
I would say that. The Iranians, when they carried out the strike, and by the way, just as well, I'll say that at the end. When the Iranians carried out the strike, they punished the Israeli regime and they humiliated the Israeli regime. But nothing is going to distract world public opinion from the Holocaust in Gaza. Don't think that the Israelis can do that. No one can do that. The Holocaust continues as we speak today. When the president of Brazil and other world leaders say what the Israeli regime is doing today to the people of Gaza is just like what the Nazis were doing in Germany, no one is going to forget because the Iranians retaliated.
Okay, let me ask you this. It's been reported. Well, no, I want to ask you something. It's been reported today that Israel is preparing to do a retaliatory strike against Iran in some capacity. We don't know how yet. And it's been said, not least by you, that if war spreads, have no doubt all American bases in the Persian Gulf region will be destroyed, and those countries that host American bases will be guilty by association. All those gas and oil installations will be destroyed by drones and missiles. I mean, that's sort of strong rhetoric, but the reality is that if Israel does strike Iran, it has a far more sophisticated and powerful military capacity. And if America was to defend it against any further retaliation of the kind that you're describing, then Iran would get wiped away, wouldn't it? I mean, you can't possibly compete with the combined military firepower of countries like Israel and America. Why would you pretend otherwise?
That's your wishful thinking. The Israeli regime is vulnerable and weak, and it has shown itself to be incapable of taking a dot on the map. They haven't been able to take Gaza after 6 months of genocide. They haven't been able to take even northern Gaza after 6 months of genocide. They have to withdraw at least 100 to 200,000 people from northern Israel because they cannot stand up to Hezbollah. They cannot push Hezbollah back. They cannot defeat them. So you think the Israeli regime is going to defeat Iran? Why is it that the Americans are concerned about any Israeli attack because they know exactly what will happen. Next time round, Iran won't be firing those old drones to gather intelligence and to empty the Israeli and the American missiles. Next time, the Iranians will be sending thousands of missiles and drones that are top-notch, and the Israelis will be punished severely. And the reason why the Americans don't want this is because they know that the balance of power has shifted.